Hi, this is Stevie. I had a photo from several years ago that I had taken of some birds in our front yard. It's not a great photo at all, but I had decided to keep the shapes of those birds. I sketched them out, and I've just kept them for quite a while. I used a couple of those birds to make a little line and wash painting on my 5x7 paper. I sketched them out with my Micron 05 pen first, and now I'm adding the color. The first thing I do is flick some water onto the paper so that it's not a completely dry surface. I like to have some water so the paint will spread and it gives it a looser look. So I'm putting some manganese blue behind them to indicate some sky. And then I added some green. That is Serpentine Genuine. That's a Daniel Smith color, kind of a medium green. And once it dries, it won't be very dark. Now I'm adding some quinacridone burnt orange to the lower portion of the painting to indicate some ground for the birds to stand on, since when I took the original photo, they were standing on the ground. And note when I spattered that color, some of it went onto the birds, which is fine because I'll be using more of that color in the birds as well. So I got that color on the ground, and now I'm spattering in some transparent orange just to give it some interest. And I'll be using that color on the birds as well, so it helps to unify the painting a lot too. And I'm going to focus on getting more color on the left side of the birds. I'm in this painting, the light source will be coming from the upper right, so the back of the birds will have more color on it, and then the tops of their heads and the front chests will have less. So I'm focusing on getting more color in the areas where there would be more of a shadow on the bird than in the real light areas. Working around the head. And as I do that, notice how I make the strokes. And I want to give the look of feathers as well. But I pull the strokes in the direction that they would be going on the bird. And I don't want those feathers to look like fur, so I'm careful to soften the ends of them once I put them down. And I'm working pretty wet right now on that bird on the left, and this is just the first layer of color, so that works fine. Now I'm spattering in some of the manganese blue toward the bottom part of the bird where there'd be more of a shadow. And I really like mingling colors like that and getting some in around the eye. On those eyes, when I drew the birds with my Micron pen, I went in and drew the eyes as well and left a little white spot on each eye for a highlight. I'll go back with some color later on and go over that, but I did want to mention that. It was an easy way to do the eyes. So, and notice that as I get back onto the wings of the bird, that I'm pulling out some strokes and leaving a little white space in between them. And that as that dries and I add more layers of color, it'll be more pronounced. And that helps to give the wings more of a layered look. Now I'm working on the bird on the right, getting some color on the left side of that bird. And that is my quinacridone burnt orange. And just working it like I did the other bird. This bird, the paper is a little drier now, so I'm not working quite so wet, so you're able to see more of those strokes, especially on the wings. And just being careful to remember that I want to keep some white highlights on those birds. So I just keep working around the areas that I need to get some color in, darkening the areas where there would be more of a shadow, and thinking about areas that will need to be darker as I move through the painting. I'm getting some manganese blue there on that bird, on the bottom section of the bird where there would be more shadow or dark areas. And I really like the look of the manganese blue with the quinacridone burnt orange. They're complementary colors and it looks really nice together. Now I'm working a little bit more on the ground under that bird on the left because there was a big white space in between his legs and I didn't want to leave it that way. So just getting some color in there, and I just had to stop and dry it with my heat gun, which is like a blow dryer, just so that I could work now on the dry paper and get a little more detail in. Working on the beak, and what I do first is I wet the beak a little bit. I mixed up some color with my quin burnt orange and I used cobalt blue, I believe. And so I wet the beak first and then start putting the color on from the bottom and let it bleed up so that it's lighter on the top of the beak. And that seems to work pretty well for doing that. Now I'm going back, getting some more color around the eyes, being careful not to cover up that white highlight that I left when I drew the eyes with my micron pen. But I did want to get more color in there, and I added some manganese blue around the eyes as well to give it a shadow and make the eyes look a little more recessed than they did. Again, getting back in those shadow areas to get some more color in there, get it darker, just to help create the form. Taking little strokes, notice how I do that in the direction that the feathers would lie. And as I make those little strokes, notice how I soften the edges, again with a little bit of water on my brush, so that they don't end up looking like fur. I'm using a Princeton No. 2 round brush to make these little strokes. I think I only used Princeton brushes for this painting, other than when I was flicking water on the paper. That was my silver brush dagger. It was a dagger brush, 1/4-inch dagger. So just pulling out those strokes and then softening the edges, creating more of a feather look. And you'll start to see how I'm leaving space in between the strokes when I pull out those feathers. Darkening it up, getting some on the tail. So with this Quin Burnt Orange, it takes a few layers to get the darkest areas dark enough so that you can see the different values. Now going back for another layer on the other bird, remembering again to leave that white highlight on his head. Sometimes that's hard to do. I don't mind too much when my paint goes out of the lines because I do like the looser look that it gives, but if it gets out of control, I just keep a paper towel by to dab it. Now I'm working around that eye, and it really helps to give dimension to that eye, doesn't it? I like how I added that manganese blue around the eyes. That looks really nice now. Getting some of the blue in there under his head, on his neck, I guess that would be. And repeating the same process over on the other bird. Softening the edges of those strokes. And just continuing to work around the bird, getting darker areas in where I need to. The paper's a little drier now, so when I make those strokes for the wings, they should be more visible. Getting a little more of the manganese blue on that bird. It tends to lighten so much when it dries, I often go back and add more. Now I mixed up a little of a gray or black color to work on the bird's legs. And I wet the bird's legs first, and then I add the color, which helps it to just spread. I just noticed that I forgot to draw the back part of that bird's leg, so I had to do that. And when you have to draw on paper that's damp, well, make sure that your paper is dry before you do that, otherwise the ink will spread everywhere. And I may need to go back and darken up those legs more, but I'll get back to that. Now I'm just going back working on the birds now that my paper or those areas are a little drier, getting more dark color in under the wings, and then making the strokes for the wings. And notice that I'm now using the darker color that I had mixed up, the cobalt blue with the burnt orange, to make the strokes on the wings, just to get them dark enough so that the strokes will show up. Getting a little darker color toward the bottom, or back of the bird, I guess, under the wings. And when I do it under the wings as a shadow, I make sure to soften that edge so it's not a hard edge. Now going back and again reinforcing some of the feathers on the head and on the back. Just looking around for areas that may need a little more color or a little more shape. And at the same time, I'm letting the back of that bird dry a little bit so I can add my feathers, my darker feather strokes. Don't want to do that on wet paper. So now I'm going in. It has dried enough that I can add those strokes, and notice that I left those light areas in between the strokes. And that's what gives those wings the feathery look. I'll just continue to keep working around, adding darker color where I think I need it. Adding more of my manganese blue. That just tends to lighten up so much. Just moving around the painting, getting more color in. Getting those feathery strokes on the wings of the second bird. And I really like how the highlights on the heads look now. It really stands out a lot more now that I've gotten more color on the birds. I'm kind of getting to the final stages of getting color on those wings, using that darker color. Drying my paper again so that I can work on the real dry surface. Darkening where I think I need to with the manganese blue. I'm getting to the final touches here, so it's where I'm really being careful about the detail. I really do like how that quin burnt orange color looks on the birds. I guess these would be sparrows. I don't know if there's different varieties of sparrows. It's whatever they have in Mesa, Arizona, where I live. But it's a common sparrow. I know when I lived in California, we had a lot of them too. Going back, darkening those legs a bit with the darker gray color. Just getting a little more color on. I don't want to make those legs too dark. That's why I'm dabbing it, because they'll kind of take over the painting. And then the last step is darkening up that ground a little bit, and notice how I make horizontal strokes when I do that. I'm using my quin burnt orange and a little bit of my transparent orange as well, but my strokes are pretty horizontal just to give the birds something to stand on. And notice also how I left some white in between the ground and the birds. And I think that looks really nice too. Now for some final spattering to create some texture, and I'll call this one done. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and thanks so much for watching.